Everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled The Significance of a Unified eClinical Platform and Key Considerations for Being Truly Unified. My name is Ryan Muse, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Axiom, who developed the content for this presentation. Axiom's real-time metrics delivers intuitive, powerful, and cost-effective eClinical solutions and services focused around your entire study. Services include data management, on-demand data analytics, biostatistics, and pharmacovigilance. Axiom's eClinical suite, Fusion, delivers a powerful range of innovative and user-focused, unified functionality and 15+ modules. Axiom serves as the connected hub for your entire clinical study data and operational needs. Fusion delivers EDC, DM, IWRS, CTMS, inventory management, ePRO, IVR, patient portal, safety database, central lab, imaging, eTMF, and 24/7 project and clinical data reporting. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Heather DiFrusicia is the Associate Director for RTSM IWRS and is responsible for managing and overseeing the RTSM department operations, strategy, processes, and software product development. Kaitlyn Townsley is the Associate Director of Product Innovation at Axiom Real-Time Metrics, Inc., where she continually innovates for the Fusion eClinical suite and related technologies to support the evolving technological needs of clinical trials as studies increase in complexity, maintaining the balance between a user-friendly and intuitive platform and providing sponsors with the complex tools that they require to run their clinical programs. Now, as founder and CEO of Axiom Real-Time Metrics, Andrew Schachter delivers the visionary leadership integral to the company's almost 20 years of eClinical technology and managed services success. The pairing of his expertise and deep knowledge of clinical research with his passion for enabling smarter and faster clinical studies has been critical to Axiom's growth in a recognized innovator and leader in the small to medium life science eClinical solutions space. And so now, without further ado, I would like to hand the presentation over to our first speaker for today. Andrew Schachter, you may begin when you're ready.
Thanks, Ryan. Good morning, afternoon, and or evening, everyone. It's great to spend some time with you. Ryan, thanks for the fantastic introduction. We're going to spend some time today talking about unified platforms and what does it really mean? What does centralized data translate to? How does it make an impact on the decision making that you have in the management of clinical studies? And at the end of the day, how does that translate into how you spend your time, how you allocate your time to managing critical issues, collating and managing and gathering information so that the appropriate stakeholders can make decisions as part of the overall process. And then the key points that we're going to cover off today is what is a unified platform? How do you bring a unified platform to bear? How do you choose one and so forth? And what truly is one? What are the differences and benefits to each of the major stakeholders? How do you get rid of manual tasks? How do you stop taking that one report that's critical to you that you output manually every time in a study and convert it into something that you need on a go-forward basis? So how do you get rid of manual tasks and automate them? And obviously one of the most critical aspects is the aspect of how do you have visibility into critical information and managing your risks. Next slide. So before we dive into the characteristics of a unified platform, I want to invite some additional guests and panelists to join us today. With me today is Theresa Luna, who's Associate Director of Clinical Operations at a major biotech company. And joining us as well is Tharak Rao, MD, who is the Senior Vice President also at a major biotech company. Welcome, guys. So as we dive in, let's chat a little bit about the critical nature of a unified platform. What is the nature of a unified platform? So the fundamental goal to us of unified information is to enable people to be able to collaborate. You want to be able to collaborate around the results. Do I have access to the key information? Is it actionable data? Is it real-time data? Those are the fundamental tasks that a unified platform enables us to do. Next. Where do we live so often? Kaitlyn?
So looking at kind of the different technology approaches that we can have, oftentimes we're working in separate systems. So you might have one EDC provider, you might have a different provider who's providing you IWRS tools, ePRO tools, etc. So typically, or it's possible that you might be living in that kind of separate system environment, which entails having to get data from different places and kind of aggregate that to get that overall complete picture of your study. And so what we want to kind of focus on today is moving towards more of a combined system. Next slide, please, Heather. And when we look at a combined system, that could be kind of a bolt-on solution where you're looking at connecting all of those different pieces. So you might have an EDC vendor and an IWRS vendor. Maybe you integrate those to be able to have a little bit more speaking together. And we're going to talk about what a truly unified system is. So just kind of the difference between those two, the bolt-on systems, while we're looking at having that those integrations and having it appear as if we have single sign-on access, it's actually can be more costly to kind of build those systems together, a few more inherent risks just because you are transferring data from different systems versus having a unified platform. So the unified platform difference is having all of those different components within one piece of technology. So it's not taking different systems and sticking them together. It's having one platform that can be flexible for the configuration of your project, enabling the different modules and tools that you would need for that study.
Okay, Len, just a thought to that. You have to think about the hidden cost of doing all that work, I would think, of pulling them all together.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely takes additional costs, but also time when you are combining those systems, especially if you're working across vendors, because as much as you can expedite what you can do on, even from a vendor perspective, you can't control what the other vendor can do, what they're capable of. So kind of managing all of those different challenges and the cost to that and the time to that can really add up and maybe delay your overall study start. So just a lot of additional thoughts when we're kind of sticking different systems together.
Got it. To that end, just to touch on ever so briefly some of the key things you would look for in a unified platform. We think one of the most important should be the idea of single sign-on. So as Kaitlyn was showing in the previous diagram, what's the important data for you in your study? What do you need to have access to all the time? It should be single sign-on. So you shouldn't be logging into 3 different systems to be able to get it. And then of course, related to that is the different parties who need that single sign-on. So does the study coordinator have to go into EDC, IWRS, and a lab portal to be able to look at data, as an example. Other considerations of things that are really important is, are you able to grab the data, for example, as in patient profile reports in a single activity? Do you have dashboards that are showing you kind of the status of different things for different people as part of the overall process? And is it easy when things do come up, because we know clinical research is not a simple process. So when you do hit a roadblock, is there a team behind you who's going to be able to help you? Next. So why wouldn't you use a unified platform? for us, it makes the most sense to be able to pull all of the things together, but we'll talk about sort of all the caveats to that in our session today.
And just kind of to that point, when we are talking about using a unified platform and some of those barriers that may exist, sometimes the vendors that you choose have certain processes, or within your company, there might be certain processes that need to be maintained. Tharak or Theresa, did you want to comment on some of those vendor specific or other challenges you might have faced?
Yeah, hi, this is Tharak Rao. I'm delighted to be on this webinar. Again, from a sponsor end, I think a big benefit with using a unified platform also relates to just shorter startup time, because various study systems that are part of this platform are already configured. They're configured to fit and work well together. As Kaitlyn mentioned, the challenges with selecting various vendors and tying together their systems to work well doesn't exist, and that's a big benefit. And importantly, I think you're also working, I think the technology is fantastic, but importantly, you're also working with a single integrated study team that is familiar, that's trained on this platform. This includes study monitors. Essentially, you're stepping into an environment that has strong team communication, alignment, and as part of realizing all of these synergies, all of this ends up translating not just to more efficient startup, but also to cost savings. And yeah, there might be instances where you might have to bring in a certain specialty vendor to perform, to bring in specific capability. But from what I've seen, it's a lot easier to bring in a single vendor into a unified platform, and the platform itself is set up in a way to tie in quite well with these specialty vendors that you tend to bring in. So overall, it's easier to integrate a single vendor than start with a whole bunch of diverse vendors and then tie them all in and tie all their systems in. And that's sort of been my experience to date. And I'd love to get Theresa's perspectives on this too.
Oh yeah, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I would like to say that it makes the RFP process more complex when you have multiple vendors, because you don't always get everything all at once, and you're not sure if you're missing something, if there's some kind of bridge you need to build for one vendor to talk to another, or if there's other things that happen that could lead to hidden costs down the road in your study, because you have to pay these hidden integration fees that you didn't know about when you started. You checked all the boxes and got all your vendors, but they're not really communicating well with each other, and it causes problems down the line. So I think that's something to really think about. And then also thinking about having real-time data, because if you're using multiple vendors, you may just get quarterly or monthly updates from one vendor or another, and all your data is not in the same place at the same time, so you can't see everything. So that's something else down the line that could be a big problem if you just happen to have a quick question and you kind of want to see where you're at in the study, and then you have to wait or request a special update. It's a little bit cumbersome and uncomfortable for the work that you're doing at the time. So that's what I would like to add there.
Great, thank you both.
I certainly agree with that, and that enables one to sort of track all aspects of study progress real time, and this helps obviously with things like forecasting and planning milestones, and that's another big benefit of using a unified platform, just the ability to track everything in real time.
And then also I'd like to add about the comfort for the site, the research centers. I mean, if they like your study and you make it easy for them, they will oftentimes choose your study over another study that they're working on, because they're saying, oh, I could put it in, I'd rather have patients for this study because I understand how it works and it's easy. I only go to one place and I log on and everything's there, and there are people to help me and guide me through it. That makes a big difference too.
Great points. And we are going to touch on stakeholders, I think, in our next section too. But you both brought up really great points. I know that when we kind of speak as to why someone might not be using a unified platform, costs sometimes come up. And if you are seeing kind of the cost for a unified platform versus comparing individual costs for each of those separate technologies, in general, the unified platform should end up working out to be cheaper because you're not going to have all of those additional kind of hidden costs that Theresa mentioned. We're going to make sure that everything's included. So if you are in a situation where they're kind of, the budgets aren't stacking up and doing everything separate seems more cost effective, I would just caution you to make sure that you are getting an apples to apples comparison of the technology that you're actually getting, the features that you're actually getting, not having to pay for additional items later on or doing combined reporting. So great points there. Andrew, anything to add to that?
No, I think we should actually go to our first poll question.
Great.
Yes, so we have a poll question for audience members to interact with in real time that should be appearing on everyone's screen right now. You can vote on this question by clicking on any of the answers and then clicking submit. The question we have for you is, what is the stakeholder that is not taken into consideration enough during the planning stages? Your answer options in front of you are sponsor, upper management, sponsor QA, monitors, subjects, caregivers, or supplier depot. We'll give you a few seconds to consider how best this applies to yourself and your company. The question again being, what is the stakeholder that you feel is not taken into consideration enough during the planning stages? It looks like most of you have voted, so let's go ahead and close the poll and take a look at your results. Interestingly, 41% of you coming in for the subjects, 29% at monitors, 18% for sponsor, 12% for supplier, and none for sponsor upper management. So again, thank you for your participation. It's back to you, Heather. Or rather, Andrew.
Yeah, gee, throw me under the bus, why don't you? I'm glad we had a chance to actually look at that question because the idea of a unified platform really translates into actually making sure that the key people that are going to use it are actually accounted for. And that's what we want to talk about next, the particular needs of the individuals who are part of that process. There are, at the end of the day, a fundamental aspect that we would suggest it just doesn't get old, and that's the quality of the planning that goes into design phase for a clinical study. And of course, we know it's so incredibly important to be focused on the overall study design and the elements of data that we want to capture, but we want to turn it around and talk a little bit about the key aspects of managing the data around the key people that they need, and everything to do with the aspect of how do we make sure that each of the stakeholders who are part of the process are really part of that aspect of getting the information that they need. So let's talk about that. Next slide. Great. So I want to open it up to us as a panel to talk a little bit about the critical participants involved. We saw on the last survey question that people felt that monitoring were not necessarily appropriately reflected in their needs, that QA was not reflected accordingly to ensure that everything's been touched on there. And I opened up to the panel for a conversation.
I can start. So just kind of touching on the monitors piece. So in our poll, we looked at 29% of you had said that our CRAs aren't consulted enough or aren't taken into consideration enough. So this is something that having a unified platform can really help support, because oftentimes monitors just need real-time access to see what their sites are doing. They need easy tools that's going to help leverage the system that they're using, that takes away from manual tasks. So even if we think about something as simple as a monitoring visit report, it takes a certain amount of time to write that content. There's content that you're always going to have to write. But if we write that report digitally, we can actually inject data, pull data from the site entry. So pull in all the consent form dates with the subjects and let the monitor go through it as a checklist, as opposed to having to retype and data enter all of those subjects and the number of counts at sites. So just kind of helping support them and making it easier for those tasks that don't really add any value to the project. So that's one of the different ways that we can think about using a unified platform, where that CTMS and EDC data are speaking to each other to pull that data together for them.
And Kaitlyn, I would add to that by saying, just to build on your point, I think Theresa and Tharak as sponsors, you could probably think of a lot of data points in a study that are often manually gathered. I'm sure in your varied careers, you've spent a heck of a lot of time doing that. But at the end of the day, the fundamental goal is, if you could eliminate manual calculations and manual gathering of information, what do you think that would do to your life as sponsors managing a study?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, I think it's really, really beneficial to us to have this ability to real-time visualize and track all aspects of study data, including ePRO data. I mean, you know, and as you mentioned, this also permits real-time monitoring of data being entered, and this includes safety data and the ability sort of for on an ongoing basis to generate queries, resolve as many of them possible, and that eventually adds to efficiency of the whole process. And when you close down your study, you're sort of almost you've done a lot of the work already, and this means that you can achieve database lock in a relatively short time, which is a big benefit. It's great for us to see real-time notifications being sent out to sites when data is missing or when data doesn't get entered, and this way we're on top of this. And similarly, the other thing is when monitors go in for visits, it's great that sites get sent out notifications on what needs to be done to prepare for the visit. So essentially means that these monitoring visits end up being very efficient, and because the sites are well prepared, they know sort of, you know, the missing areas that need to be addressed ahead of the visit. They and repeat reminders get sent out, so that's very helpful. I think, you know, and importantly, I think it's bi-directional. It's not just us getting data. It's also really great to have sort of a integrated forum through which you can communicate with sites, where you can post messages, where you can have help sheets so that sites can access them at any time. So it's honestly, you know, to us, it's bi-directional, and it again means that you have a happy site, because the site has information, things are responsive, and it translates to benefits. Theresa?
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
great points. Yeah. Theresa?
Yeah, I'd like to focus a little bit on the monitors, because I think the monitors are such a key player in this whole in running a study. And if you can make everything easy and comprehensive for the monitor, your study just goes so much better. So monitors don't have to manually count drag and use a little worksheet. They're not looking at paper enrollment logs. You know, everything is in one place, and even the monitoring reports are in the same system. So if they need to know anything, they can look. And there's oftentimes in integrated systems like a study info tab where all of the documents are posted. So if they want to look at the protocol and they said, oh, I forgot to bring the protocol, or it's in my email somewhere, they can just go to the tab for like study info or something, and all of those documents are there and they can look at them. And if the site says, oh, I need a temperature log, I don't have one, or something like that, they can just go and get that information right from a centralized place, and they don't have to ask anybody or go anywhere else. It's all there and they can look at it, and it's easy and it's up to date. So I think that's really one of the things that you want to have is a happy monitor that knows what they're doing and can communicate well to the sites, because that relationship needs to be really strong and comprehensive, and it gives the study coordinators and the PIs confidence in the study when their monitor is able to go and answer all the questions very quickly. So I think that's one of the big things that is really helpful. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with that. So anything else to add, Tharak? Or
No, I think you covered it all.
I think those are great points. Absolutely. All right, jumping to our next area.
Oh, and actually, just quickly, I just
Hi,
wanted to pop in here just to touch on a couple of items. One being on the supplier depot side. So 12% had noted, the audience had noted that the supplier depot is often missed in that in those initial design phase and initial discussions. And so another piece of having that centralized platform is really making sure that all of those pieces are supported. There isn't any of those pieces that are forgotten, because all of the modules are there to support them. So having those discussions early on, making sure you can adjust and configure the system to support the depot's needs. Maybe you're using a smaller depot, maybe they don't have an automated packing list, for example. Being able to have that centralized platform that has the ability and flexibility to support these vendor needs is essential to streamlining that inventory workflow, which can definitely be a tricky one, especially when you're trying to line up all of your different lead times to make sure that you can have the drug on site or devices on site for study start, that initial SIV. But I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Heather.
Oh, I was just going to see if we want to move forward with our next poll question.
I was going to say, sounds like a plan.
Great.
All right, so for our next poll question, it should be appearing on everyone's screen right now. And the question we're asking this time is, which task is the most frustrating to do manually? Or what do you find yourself doing manually more often? Site startup, screening, enrollment, and dosing, safety, medical review, or monitor study metrics? We'll give you a moment to consider your answer and select either of them and then click submit. We appreciate everyone taking the time to participate in the poll. Our question again is, which task is the most frustrating to do manually, or what do you find yourself doing manually most often? It looks like most of you have submitted a vote. Let's take a look at those results. 38% for monitor study metrics, 31% for the safety medical review, 25% for screening, enrollment, and dosing, and then 6 coming in at the end for site startup. So again, thank you. And Heather and Andrew, it's back to you.
Great,
thanks,
Ryan. I'd just like to jump in just to touch on, it looks like we had a pretty good spread across the board. So unfortunately, it does look like many of you are doing these tasks manually. So we will talk about actually each of these items and walk through how a centralized platform can help you with these tasks and different ways to kind of move things along. Andrew?
Thanks, Heather. Yeah. So it's really interesting when you look at those results and we see the idea about the largest one being monitor metrics. I find it fascinating on the aspect of conducting clinical studies and delivering the technology to do it for the past 20 years. The idea of people spending time to gather something up that should be at their fingertips instead of being in a position where you're simply managing what the issue is. As we can see in that poll question, there's a lot of time being spent to be able to gather primary information that you need as managers of studies to do your jobs. And we think today, we're in 2020, and think we're all going to be really happy to say goodbye to 2020. But as we sit here in 2020 on the verge of 2021, that type of information should be available to you. So regardless of what technology you choose, we fundamentally believe that if you can have access to these types of information across these various categories, it should put you in a position as managers and sponsors of studies to actually be affecting better decisions versus collecting data on a manual basis. So we want to talk a little bit about the site startup activity, monitoring activity, managing the overall process. And so as an overall starting point from a startup perspective, when you guys start and manage your studies, you're probably spending time looking at things like this. So you need to be able to track everything. Where are your contracts? Where's the timing at? What information are you missing as part of the overall process? And then kind of what information do you need to be able to turn on your site? So when are you ready to click the button to be able to do that? Put up your hand. I'm not one of these, but I'm going to ask you to put up your hand at home. Put up your hand if you've done all of these activities in a spreadsheet, and how many times you've done it in a spreadsheet. It's probably quite a few. We know that at the end of the day, the spreadsheet is workable, but it's out of date the moment you begin to distribute the information across the board. So we really think that this list of study startup is a perfect example of where, from a unified platform, it would put you in a position to be able to bring it all together.
So
Shifting into screening, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you. So the screening, enrollment, and dosing, we're coming together with all of these different pieces. So one part is having the technology that can support it, of course. So, and this is talking about, of course, different configurations. You can have a very simplified configuration, or maybe you're talking about an oncology configuration, which is often on the complex side. So having that full integration and that ability to link to inventory as well is key. So some of these aspects of a unified technology and a flexible technology would be real-time dynamic randomization and cohort activation, being able to adjust and set any enrollment caps at different levels. Maybe there's a need for an approval at the specific subject level and approvals by different personnel. Being able to manage subject replacements, looking at eligibility controls, as well as visualizing all of this through your reporting, dashboards, etc. So here you can see where we're kind of bringing all of these pieces together. So you have that initial cohort activation, being able to activate the cohort, specify any details, whether you're talking about specific batches that need to be used to optimize your inventory, or maybe it's a titration schedule that's specific to a particular cohort. Being able to, in real time, manage that automatically, so then that can then tie into the steps as we go along. So any pre-screening activity, being able to track and plan ahead for when those slots will be available and what potential cohort they might be enrolled into. The actual screening activity, of course, captured within your EDC. Any additional medical monitor review, adjudication, that stamp of approval, in addition to the PI's assessment, means that you can be that much more confident that the subject is truly eligible and being enrolled into the most appropriate cohort if applicable. Then you have the actual randomization and assignment, and of course, there's the site component, the sponsor, CRO level component, the medical monitor. All of these stakeholders are coming together to be able to do this process. And then, of course, moving forward with dosing, which is tying in the randomization cohort piece with inventory. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but you can see how a unified platform really brings the people and the data together.
Thanks, Heather. I'd like to ask Theresa and Tharak comments on your life as professionals going through the process and managing safety and medical review and clinical review, and how your thoughts on how sort of bringing unified technology into the mix helps.
Lisa, do you want to get started?
Oh, sorry, did you? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I'll go ahead and get started. I think that one of the things that's really helpful if you have everything together, you can have systems that'll provide alerts. So you don't have to like log into the database to find out if somebody has an AE or an SAE. You can get an email notification if something significant happens. You can set alarms in the system and all the data is together. So all the data pulls in. And as the report that's noted below, you can see that also we can pull these custom reports on a regular basis and look at patients on a per patient basis and find out if there's any trends or if there's any data that's a big concern, like if there's any high or low labs that are really significant that need follow-up. So that's nice that we have the reporting, and you can also have standard reports, but in addition, if you have all the data together, you can also a lot of times do ad hoc customized reports if you want to look at a specific area or a specific point in the study. So that's something that's also extremely helpful. So, and it's just really the flexibility, the ability to communicate with the sites and the medical monitor and other key important people within the study. So I think those are things that are really helpful with a unified platform.
And Theresa, just a quick comment to that. I think you guys would agree. The standard has very often been that you're going to typically grab the data, give it to a biostatistician. They'll go ahead and create a sort of patient profile report. And what we hear from sponsors such as yourselves is that that patient profile report is kind of out of date, obviously, the moment they made it, which is part of what we see is a big part of the challenge is we're talking about sort of the manual versus automated. I got a patient profile, which is great, but it's literally out of date. So if the coordinator updated that data, it's old information. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's really key, that we're able to refresh the data anytime we want. We don't have to wait for the lab or somebody else to import the data into the system. It's always there all the time. So whenever you want to look at it, and if you're following a patient closely because they're kind of borderline for maybe being taken off study medication or something, and you want to watch them and make sure and know whether their labs are going up or down, it's really important to have those tools available so we can consult with the site about a subject if that's needed.
Yeah, and Andrew, to me, I think, as a clinical person, there's a huge benefit to sort of having an integrated view relating to data that pertains to all aspects of safety, right? So there's clinical data, there's lab data, there's ePRO data, and having everything on a single platform means that I can very easily look for correlations to see if a certain signal is real, if it's concerning, if it's not, use the same forum to communicate with the site, communicate with the monitor. So in a way, it's sort of this ability to pull everything together makes it very strong.
Totally.
Sort of the integrative aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. To that end, can we go to the next slide? I think it's helpful sort of touching on that point. It just reminded me, Tharak, of idea of, from a clinical standpoint, let's say there's a major event that you want to know, such as, you know, the number of related SAEs, which I can imagine as a sponsor, you're always interested in tracking. And there are probably other critical data points that you want to be able to see and be aware of. And Theresa, as you mentioned, it could be by email, text, or visual report. But as you're planning activity and managing the study, those salient data points being pulled to the surface, I would imagine makes your lives easier. Thoughts?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're just better prepared, because the minute you see a signal, right? I mean, at least that's how I use it. My ability to go and look more holistically at the subject in terms of various data points, looking at labs, looking at what were findings during his last site visit, what has the patient been entering on in terms of their, you know, into their study diary in terms of related events, and how does it all tie in together. It just means that I'm better prepared real time to sort of track where a patient is at a particular time. So it's that aspect combined, of course, with ability to look for specific events, whether they be, you know, AEs or SAEs, and yeah, I mean, I think it gives a very good broad snapshot of safety information, which I think would be a bit challenging if various systems weren't talking to each other.
Totally. And you know, we think at Axiom, we think about the idea from a dashboard perspective of what we talked about earlier is what are the needs of the different people? What are the needs of different stakeholders? And we kind of want to reflect on what's going to help them better manage the study. Right. So as Theresa said, monitors are obviously, if they get forgive me, Theresa, I'll put words in your mouth, but if they get the appropriate love on the information that they need, hopefully that puts them in a position to be empowered to know what's happening with their sites and the information, and therefore be able to manage the oversight and the risks and so forth as part of the study.
Yeah, and it also makes the monitor more effective, because they can go in there and do their job quicker because they have the data readily available. So they won't have to spend multiple days at a site looking through data. It'll be more streamlined for them, so they should be able to do their job quicker.
Totally. To that end, I want to bring up our last poll question of the day, which is preferred methods for managing risk and oversight in a study.
Yes, so that should be up on everyone's screen right now. As before, you can select any of the options you see in front of you and then click submit. The question, of course, again, is what is your preferred method for risk management or oversight? And your answer options are listings, summary reports, dashboards, visuals, or real-time notifications. This will be the last poll we ask of you, and we definitely appreciate you taking the time to interact with these and submit an answer, provide some wonderful insights. Again, the question is, what is your preferred method for risk management or oversight? It looks like most of you have submitted a vote. We're going to close this off and take a look at your results. 47% coming in for real-time notification, 24% both for summary reports and dashboards, visuals, and then 6% coming in the end for listings. And then it's back to you now, Andrew.
Thank you. I'm truly not surprised. I'm truly interested in kind of just as a quick touch point on the survey results. It's interesting how the idea, Kaitlyn, of real-time notifications, which is something we've done at Axiom since we got started, remains so prevalent in people's minds of managing research. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. We're so used to having technology tell us when anything's happening, when we get an email, when we get a message from this app. So it makes sense that for your clinical trial, you want that same type of alert and kind of the ease of making sure that we're not missing anything. You don't want to have to go dig for that information. So having that notification, it makes sense why people prefer it for risk because you need to have a real-time handle on it. So getting that notification lets you act faster, which kind of leads us directly into our next slide. So looking at your technology, it should be doing exactly this. It should be helping you to know more, helping to know it sooner, so you can make a decision and act faster about it. So it really makes sense as to kind of why those notifications are so important, because it's taking all of those steps and letting you make a real decision about your study and not having to log in and go find that information, gather it, find out there's a problem, and then deal with it. Just moving along in kind of those other types of tools we can use to help manage and mitigate risk. We want to make sure that in your study you have instant access to your study data. So coming back to a unified platform, we talked about this at the very beginning. The idea of having everything in one place means you can have those reports with all of those different levels of information. You're not getting an EDC report and an IRT report and combining them. You can pull one report to look at the status of your patients, your inventory, their randomization, everything. And that should be easy. It shouldn't require having someone else or your vendor pulling that report for you on a scheduled basis. You should be able to go in and access your data as quickly as possible using lots of different tools. And so just some of the key types of tools we wanted to highlight is just having that overall data visibility for any trends, analysis, looking at stale or missing data, kind of Tarak's earlier point about being able to stay on top of the study and make sure it's being cleaned as we go so that we can lock efficiently. Having access to this data kind of keeps you on track for doing that so that you can actually close efficiently and get your data submitted, which is obviously the most important part.
You mean, Kaitlyn, you shouldn't have to be a computer programmer to get data?
No, you shouldn't have to ask someone to go pull that report for you or build it from scratch every time you want a report, or pulling SAS data sets and then programming a new report because now it's already out of date, which kind of speaks to having that real-time direct access to that data. You should be able to go in at any stakeholder level. You should be able to go in as a site coordinator and see data that maybe you've missed or haven't closed off, or a monitor overseeing their sites to see, oh, there might be some deviations here that we haven't captured yet, or at a sponsor super high level or management level saying, okay, well, why is only 50% of my study clean? Just having that overall access to all of the different types of output and all of the different formats that are going to make sense for each of your stakeholders. So coming back to that stakeholder thought, making sure that all of those items are kind of tailored to the individual users and are flexible in how they're set up. Next slide. We already touched on notifications, but having all those key alerts and notifications, which everyone seems to be interested in having. Next. And so being able to track that overall data entry and review workflow, having visuals, having tools, having a flexible workflow built into the platform so that it's not just cleaning the EDC data, you're also making sure that their inventory, physical reconciliation has been done, that all of the bottles are properly accounted for, that all of their lab data has been submitted and sent in and received. So it's actually that holistic view of the data when we go through that cleaning process. So we're not waiting till the end to go through and look or reconcile additional pieces. It's all being done. So when you actually get to your locking timeline, all of those steps are done. Next slide. And I will pass it back to Andrew just to cover any additional last items before we wrap up today.
Thanks, Kaitlyn. So guys, thanks for spending time with us. Just to give you a little bit about how we think about these things. We really believe this whole idea of a connected hub, having access to sort of every piece of information in a single platform. That's why I founded Axiom 20 years ago, and we started building out a unified platform. It looks like this. We'd be happy to chat with you at any given time about the needs. And for us, it's really about the most important thing. It's about the different modules that you need to run the different type of study. And at the end of the day, why would you want to work with us? Hopefully you got a flavor for a little bit about how we think. But the most important thing beyond the technology is, one, really, really smart really, really smart people, number one, excuse me, and number two, the idea that we are just relentlessly committed to study success. So thank you guys for spending time with us, and we're now going to turn it over and answer some questions for those participants today.
All right, well, thank you very much for that very insightful presentation. I'd like to invite our audience to continue sending their questions or comments right now using the questions window for this Q&A portion of the webinar. I've already received some questions, so we'll get started with those. Our very first question asks, what benefits or advantages do unified eClinical platforms provide compared to traditional individual solutions?
So I can start us off here, and if everyone can get on their webcams here, then we can kind of talk through. But just some quick notes. So of course, in our presentation, we highlighted a bunch of those benefits there, and it's really around the centralized data access, the efficiencies. So when you have that unified technology, you're not spending the time focusing on bringing the data together. You're able to focus on it's also analyzing the data and identifying and flagging the actionable data, so you can really focus on that decision making. So it's doing all the work to bring all the data together and bring any key items to your attention. And then on the other side is the automation of the workflows, which again, as we touched on, we're talking about increased efficiencies and minimal and reduced errors, and that really means that you have that greater data integrity. Any other notes to add?
Yeah, I think the only other item I would add, just kind of on the benefits overall, cost and time. I mean, it's going to be a lot faster and to set up a unified platform. We don't have to worry about those integrations. On the cost efficiency side, we don't need to worry about hidden costs down the line. There's never going to be an extra integration cost. It's already one piece of technology. So cost and time, I mean, it's critical for each of our studies that we're running to manage those and use those resources that we have efficiently. And by using also the unified platform, we're also going to decrease the amount of manual work that people do. So we're also not only saving money maybe on the technology or the different tools that we're using, but you're actually going to save people time, which ends up translating to additional resources for you as well. So just some other items to highlight there.
Theresa, Tharak, any comments before I close that point off?
No, you guys made some good points, so I think that you covered it well, so thank you.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think the only other thing I'd like to add is that also eventually, as Theresa had mentioned, translates to happy study sites, because you know, along with the hidden costs, when you integrate these systems, there are always kinks that happen, and then you have to go back and fix those kinks and find workarounds, and sites get pulled into this and they're not too thrilled about this, and it's just so much of back and forth. And sort of to step into an environment where everything has been shown, proven to work, integrates really well, makes for just a smooth workflow, but importantly, sites that are also very happy in terms of their experience working with you. And I think, to me, that's just a priceless benefit. Thanks.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Next question.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. So our next question then asks, considering the changes in regulatory guidance due to COVID-19 and the increased prevalence of virtual and hybrid trials, the question is, how does a unified eClinical platform better support the new requirements?
I can get us started. So I think just in terms of COVID-19, a lot of people moving to remote work and maybe not having that interaction, let's say from the sponsor side, or having reduced time in the clinics on the site side. I think a lot of teams are more reliant on technology, obviously. So making sure that you have a technology that has additional features that maybe you didn't know you needed before. Maybe before patients were coming in and they were doing a paper diary and they were your site was entering it in. Well, maybe now your patients aren't going to come hand in their paper diaries. Maybe now you need an ePRO solution. So when you are working with a unified platform that has lots of these different pieces of technology, even if you didn't start with that need, I think COVID-19 and the pandemic has kind of taught us that that need might come up. So having a vendor who already supports these different aspects is really beneficial to the sponsor, because you don't need to go source a new vendor, go through that entire process. You can kind of hit the ground running with working on those additional needs and kind of supporting what your new needs are throughout the process. And kind of speaking to our earlier points on data access for the different stakeholders, it's just overall really, really good transparency for the different team members on those statuses, and being able to remote monitor without any extra work or track those items. So I think there's a lot of really great features of the unified platform that has actually been highlighted during this time. Anyone else with any additional thoughts there?
I was just going to throw out real quick, we touched on some of the points and building on what you've already said, Kaitlyn. The idea of, you know, the more things, when we think about diaries and the more we do digitally, there's a heck of a lot you could do there. And, you know, a lot of studies, you know, think about a paper diary, but obviously an electronic diary changes all that. The ability to be able to, Tharak, as you said, sort of communicate with the site is obviously really important, but it also gives us the ability to communicate with the patient and find out what's going on with them, make sure whether they're taking their medications, whether it's a device that they're actually using the medical device, or whether it's a drug, you know, that they're actually accounting for it, tracking their con meds. There's just so much that we can do in a virtual or remote trial in a unified platform.
Yeah, I would like to bring up the point that it's easier to make changes, because sometimes, like with COVID-19, I know that we had to make changes. We had to start collecting specific information related to COVID-19. Was like your AE related to our study, or was it related to COVID-19? So, or was it caused by some sort of inability to get to the site because of COVID-19? You couldn't get your assessment done because you just couldn't make it to the clinic. So I think when you have a unified system, and any changes you need to make to accommodate a pandemic or anything else that might be as terrible, I can't think of anything. No, it's really nice that it's all together, because you can make the change across the board really easily.
And just jumping in and tagging on to that, Theresa, it's looking at, I think you hit on the key point, that it's making the change across the board. Because when you have that centralized platform, when you have that centralized team, then it means that you're looking at it from all those angles, because you're bringing all those perspectives together. So that means that when you do that update, then you're less likely to have to make another update and another update as you move along, because there's that ability to see that full picture and assess all of the impacts and roll that out all together.
Yeah, I think the other big advantage that I see something such as this ushering in is basically just its ability to make site-based monitoring much more efficient, right? Because most of our studies use a combination of centralized monitoring and site-based monitoring. And by shifting more to centralized monitoring, and by upfront notifying sites of you know what will be looked at and what needs to be looked at during a site visit, you just essentially, and having a monitor who's plugged into the system, you're basically creating a very tightly knit paradigm where the monitoring visit itself becomes much more efficient, and perhaps does not need to happen quite as frequently, because you've shifted a lot of that to a remote setting. And again, I think in these times where sites are challenged with welcoming monitors because of restrictions, you know, this type of critical allocation becomes really important and helpful, because you can still ensure that all your safety requirements are met and monitoring is good, without really needing to have monitors spend a lot of time on site.
Couldn't
All
agree
right,
more.
well, thank you very much for that answer. All of the answers. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time here today. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Axiom may follow up with you, or if you have further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's on your screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, I'm about to send you a link in the chat box, and with this link, you'll be able to view a recording of this event on this page, and you can share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording there as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, and we hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you as well.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it.